Welcome to Law Focus. I'm Edward St. Pé. Let's now meet Mr. Nathan Prescott.
Once again,
It's great to see you, Nathan.
Nice to see you. We're back filming the show in mid-August of 2021. This won't be an evergreen episode. I hope an evergreen episode in the broadcasting parlance is an episode that you can run over and over again because it always has, universal content. But this will be sort of timestamp specific because I think we've got something that's very interesting that's happening out there, and that's the Delta variant and all of our reactions to it. Of course, we've been battling COVID-19 since, March of 2020. Now here we are in August of 2021, and the battle still rages on, but we're not battling the original iteration of COVID. We're battling the Delta variant. You've heard about it?
Yes, I have heard about the Delta variant.
Sure. So you can't go around without looking at it, and I want to get into what Delta variant may do. Of course, this show is focused on the law and you, or the focus on the law, but I would like to see how what mandates may come forth. When we originally addressed mandates for COVID-19, we discussed mask mandates potentially, but that's because we didn't have a vaccine. And then when the vaccine came out, we moved on to different topics because the vaccine really did a lot to sort of slow the swell and allow people to go back into, the normal day-to-day life. But now the Delta variant is out there, so we might not have just mask mandates, but we could potentially have vaccine mandates, and I think Clarence has got some graphics that we'll show a little later. But we're talking about vaccine mandates in higher education, vaccine mandates in going into businesses, and potential states that have adopted or will adopt sort of a anti-discrimination clause against those parties that have not been vaccinated. So if we're going to get into all that, I think it benefits us to lay some groundwork as to some research concerning the Delta variant and why the Delta variant could be more serious than the original variants, or the original article, I guess, the original article, and why that could justify some serious mandating in the future. So the Delta variant's out there. It's been around for a few months now, but if the original particle of COVID was sort of slick in oil, this Delta variant is sort of like Gorilla Glue. It's very, very sticky. It's something that when it gets into your throat, it can stick in there and begin to infect the party. So it's different in shape. The doctors are finding that the viral loads produced in the back of the throat by the Delta variant are sometimes 1,000 more than were from original COVID. So there's a lot more of it in the back of the throat. And there's something that we've all heard of, I think, recently in the news. And of course, I'm no physician, but I think it's important for us to talk about these things because, there's a lot of different news sources out there. So this is from the CDC. There's an R0 value, right? And an R0 value, it looks like an RO, but it talks about how many people, if you have, say, COVID-19, or if you have the Delta variant thereof, it talks about how many people you can expect to infect. So original COVID, you heard of this? No. So original COVID-19, if you had it, its R0 number was 2. That is, if you had it, you would probably infect 2 other people. The R0 of the Delta variant is 8 to 8.5, so that's a lot of people. So not only can the Delta variant get in you more quickly because of this Gorilla Glue tenacity, and its viral load is much bigger, so it can infect you better, but also you're more likely to spread it to others. So that's what our governments are looking at when we talk about the mandatory vaccines and the mandatory masks. You've got something that's more easily communicable, you've got something that's more deadly, and you've got something that's stronger and ill affecting people. So now that we've got sort of a baseline of what the Delta variant is, can it be prevented? Is there something out there that we can do? Well, of course, masks help. So the CDC says, and I believe that firmly. So if you've got the vaccine, if you got the vaccine, you are 25 times less likely to die or to be hospitalized if you get the Delta variant. So I understand that people out there are making what they believe are calculated risks, but that's a pretty good risk. If you have the vaccine, you're 25 times, this is from the CDC, you're 25 times less likely to die or be hospitalized. That's what the report is. You're 8 times less likely to come up with symptoms of another disease. A lot of times I think that the Delta variant will infect you, and then something else like your heart acts up, or you've got some other kind of cardiopulmonary problem. Well, if you have the vaccine, you're 25 times less likely to die, according to the sources, and you're 25 times less likely to be hospitalized. You're 8 times less likely to have symptoms of another disease caused by COVID, and you're 3 times less likely to be infected. So my real worry when you started hearing about the Delta variant was, oh no, you've got this Delta variant out there and we've just been vaccinated, or we've just thought of the vaccine and it won't work for Delta variant. If the vaccine did not work for Delta variant, we'd have a real problem. We could all see that. It would be scary that we had spent all this time, or spent the amount of time necessary to develop a vaccine for COVID-19, but then the Delta variant, was immune to it. That would be scary, but that's not the case. From what we understand, you're 25 times less likely to die or be hospitalized. And the Delta variant, it turns out, is affecting a lot of people that weren't affected by the original COVID. I remember that you and I ran some numbers at one point where we were talking about older people being infected by COVID, but there's a younger swath of people being affected by the Delta variant, and people are dying out there. We've all seen the recent headlines in Mississippi that the University Medical Center is starting to use its garage as an ICU unit, and we as a state of Mississippi have had to reach out to help from a company or a nonprofit called Samaritan's Purse to bring in beds to put in Jackson to treat people, right? So you got the Delta variant out there. Now, what has the government done? What has the governor done? You know what the governor's done, right? We've talked about it before the show. The governor has said, y'all make your decisions concerning the masks, right? And that's been an interesting, we've gotten national press, both good and bad, for that, or positive and negative, depending on which side of the aisle you're on, I guess. There's a lot of states that have begun to mandate masks going around. Our neighbor to the west, Louisiana, has done some things, and our neighbor to the east, Alabama, has done some things. But our governor has said, wear a mask if you want, don't wear a mask if you want. I'm not going to require it, and I'm going to allow the individual entities, the individual cities and townships, or cities and towns and school boards and everything else to make those mass decisions. Well, some people say, we want some guidance from our government, and some people say, well, thank you, but I know in Ocean Springs, for instance, there are masks, in other communities that are not masks, so we all got to be aware of that. But what we really need to get into today, and what the focus of the show is, now that we've laid a groundwork of what the Delta variant is what can the government do? Can the government take steps to require masking or require vaccines? What are your thoughts on it, Edward?
It's
tough.
It's a bit of a conundrum,
Sure.
You got the freedoms that people expect, right?
Right.
You don't want to be mandated to do something with your health if you don't want to. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, the public good is at stake, and everybody is trying to, vax up to help the cause. So it's it's a bit of a dilemma,
Mm-hmm. I understand that. So this has happened before. believe it or not. And there have been epidemics or pandemics before, and our government has weighed in. So states, so the 10th Amendment says the Constitution allows that states have the power to police their states. Any power not reserved by the federal government that the state can govern. So we've gotten some really neat things just recently. In Mississippi, there's no mask mandate, but previously mask mandates were challenged. But a mask is on your face, right? So that's a little different than an injection in your body, right? Like the people out there who fear masks, you know, or who fear the vaccine may not fear masks. It's not quite as invasive, right? Mm-hmm. If given the option where you either got to wear a mask or you got to have a vaccine, I mean, you'll wear a mask, right?
Right.
Okay. You know, so some people wear a mask and won't get the vaccine because they're not sure what the vaccine will do to them over time. And those people, you know, some of them actually believe and understand that their chances of death are greater without the vaccine, but still refuse to accept the vaccine. And those people out there probably understand that their chance of transferring the disease to somebody who may be killed by the disease is greater if they don't take the vaccine, but still they choose, for whatever reason, not to have the vaccine. It's an independent liberty thing, or they're scared of what the vaccine will do to them in the long run, or they don't trust Pfizer, they don't trust Johnson & Johnson, they don't trust the CDC, they don't trust the government. Whatever the case may be, people have made personal choices, and our nation was founded on these kinds of, on certain personal choices. And this is a sticky subject. I understand, viewers, that, you know, accept the vaccine or don't accept the vaccine, and people are pretty strong on both sides of that. One thing that should be noted is a case is coming up. So certain schools in Mississippi, Clarence, do you still have that graphic? If you don't, that's okay. But the schools in Mississippi are, there it is. The universities in Mississippi are mandating, thank you, Clarence. The universities in Mississippi are mandating masks, okay? Masks in public colleges and universities, but the governor has not, right? So their argument here is just as we can tell you what you have to study, just as we can tell you what time you have to go to class, we can also make a mask, and this is a public safety concern, moving from the universities, the individual sort of fiefdoms of the universities, to the students, because they don't want to spread it and they want to keep the things alive. That is legal. We've found in many cases that kind of mask mandate is legal. So it's pretty interesting that none of these schools, so it's neat too for me to see all of our colleges outlined there. But it is neat that they do all require masking, and the governor does not require masking on the outside. But I think we're about ready for a break, and we'll get into a little more detail later on.
Let's take a break, and we'll be right back.
Thank you, Clarence.
Ocean 7 Television, and Carl the Downtown Rooster. You might say they've got a lot in common. Ocean 7 is the only television station operating from Ocean Springs, and Carl the Rooster is the only rooster walking around downtown Ocean Springs. Carl the Rooster and Ocean 7, two of a kind. Back to Law Focus with Nathan Prescott, and we're talking about
we're talking about mask mandates and vaccine mandates. So, like I said, before when COVID was younger, we were talking about mask mandates, and there were a lot of people that say, well, I'm not going to wear a mask. Remember, in those circumstances, individual businesses can require masks as you go in, right? So our question, there's no question about that. But our question is, what can the government do to require masks? The government can regulate its own health and safety, so state governments can require masks in certain public places, right? So that was the original COVID question, but now we've got a vaccine, and a vaccine that works and reduces death, reduces communicability, reduces, will potentially get us all back on the streets again often. So what can be done there? Well, that's going forward. We're moving through some case law, which is pretty interesting. We're moving through some case law to find out what the federal government is going to say about mandatory vaccinations, or what the United States Supreme Court will say against mandatory vaccinations if we get all the way up the ladder, right? So what happened at Indiana University, right, was a bunch of students came out and said, or Indiana University of Indiana said, we don't want masks. I mean, we want masks and we want vaccines, and if you don't have a mask and you don't have a vaccine, then you can't come to college. Right, so we're coming up on fall. Everybody's starting school. With these kids, the kids and the students, they said, well, I got to go to college, and I don't want to take the vaccine. So I need a temporary restraining order or an injunction against Indiana University, dictating that they have to let me in even though I don't have a vaccine. Okay. So that's really an interesting series of cases. So it went to the district court. The district court said, I can't issue an injunction here. The Indiana University can require you to have a vaccine. It then went to the Court of Appeals in Chicago, and that court said you can require, a university like a state can regulate its health and safety and require a vaccine if you're going to attend there. And frankly, you've got other options. If you want to go to college from Zoom, or you want to go to a different college that doesn't require masking, you can do that. This is a choice that you're making. One of those things that is contingent upon the choice, or one of those choices, one of those sort of ancillary choices that you make, is that you have to get a vaccine if you come to Indiana University of Indiana. So ultimately, they were peeved, and they wanted to take it to the United States Supreme Court. The United States Supreme Court, we recently got Amy Coney Barrett, a Trump appointee, into the court system, right? And everybody was waiting with bated breath as to what she would do, whether she would take up the hearing on the injunction, or whether she would, punt it to other members of the court, or whether she would ultimately reject it. What happened? So everybody was waiting. She's the one that hears these kinds of emergency petitions from that district, which includes Chicago and Indiana, or Illinois and Indiana. And she got it up there, and she read it, obviously, presumably, and she rejected it out of hand. She did not ask her other justices to weigh in, and nor did she write a long opinion or a opinion whatsoever. She said that you're not entitled to the injunctive relief, or we're not going to hear it, and the case of the Court of Appeals, or the ruling of the Court of Appeals in Chicago stands, which does allow for mandatory vaccination if you're going to attend a public university. I think what you and I need to talk about, Edward, is the difference between a mandatory vaccination and a compelled vaccination, right? So a mandatory vaccination through the laws, a mandatory vaccination would prohibit you from entering certain places. You have to have a vaccination.
Like the Saints game.
Right, like the Saints game. They're going to make us show a card, right?
Have to show a card.
Right. Or who knows what's next. There might be a restaurant, or the city of New Orleans.
The city of New Orleans is mandating restaurants too, starting, I think, this weekend.
Okay, so you have to show a card, right?
Have to show a vaccination card, yeah.
Okay, so that's mandatory vaccination, which prohibits access, right? It prohibits access to certain things, right? So you can't go to a sporting event, you can't go see music, you can't eat at restaurants. So there's different levels to that, right? So that's a mandatory vaccination that prohibits certain things. That hasn't gone to the street yet, right? There's not a vaccination police officer coming around and saying, hey, look, you're walking down the street. Do you have a vaccine?
Your papers, sir.
Right. That's not happening, right? Right. You're worried about that. I know you,
Well,
Edward.
it's a concern that, you know, something like this, if you you know, it's like taking a sledgehammer to a rock, and you crack it and you chisel it, and as freedoms wash away, you end up with something that you don't even recognize at the end, and all your freedoms have been stripped away, well, under the pretext of your own safety.
Sure.
It could be the Patriot Act, you know, after 9/11, which some might say went a little too far in some ways.
Sure.
You know, some might argue that point. Or it could be this, or it could be anything. It's sleight of hand, maybe, in a way. You don't know it's happening until it's over and it happened, and then you say, well, wait a minute, you know, well, how did this happen? You know.
Yeah. So I think that, you know, I think that we sort of dance along these opinion lines, and everybody has an opinion. I grant that, but I just want the viewers to know that legally, the government has been allowed to mandate masking, and the government has been allowed to mandate vaccination cards for the entry of certain establishments in order to protect the welfare of the people. Right. So we also have that Indiana case where, you know, you're going up on Indiana. As you move up into Indiana, you got to have your vaccine. But where did that come from? Remember, way back when we started this show, I don't know, 2 years ago or whatever, we talked about stare decisis and let the decision stand. So if a Supreme Court makes a decision and a new case is on point, or a new case relates to that old decision, then the Supreme Court must let that decision stand. Guys, we're not here in 2021 facing the first pandemic or epidemic that ever existed. There was a smallpox epidemic in 1905, and in that case, there was a Jacobson versus Massachusetts. Massachusetts said, you got to go out there and you've got to have a smallpox vaccine or you're going to be fined $5. $5 was about $150 back then, right? So they haven't done that to you yet, Edward, but they could. So in that case, there was a man named Jacobson. Listen to this story, guys. This is a tough story. Jacobson, he wasn't just being thoughtful about what the vaccine could do. He had vaccines in his native country of Sweden, okay? And those vaccines had ill-affected him. He had gotten sick, and they had debilitated him, right? So he came to Massachusetts. Well, in Massachusetts, they said, you got to have your vaccine, right? And he said, look, my son and I are going to have the vaccine. This stuff almost killed me before, right? Yeah. Like, it's very scary to me for these very specific reasons that I'm not going to have my vaccine.
So
and
what happened to
they said
Jacobson?
they said you're fined. And then Jacobson did a lot like what the Indiana University students did. He took it to the district court, then he took it to the Court of Appeals, and then he took it to the Supreme Court. And what did the Supreme Court do? Any idea?
They told him, no, you have to have the vaccine.
Yeah, you got to have the vaccine. And I'll read, it's a Justice Harlan who's well respected, and I've got his opinion here, but
even though you were sick before with the last vaccine, you have to take this one too.
But this is an interesting note. So at Indiana, the court did note that there's a lot of exceptions in Indiana, right? Like, if you've got a religious problem with it, if you've got a health concern about it, there's a lot of ways that you can get in. These students probably could have gone to college they could have gone to college, but we make laws a lot of times in the margins. We make laws when people say, well, I know I could say that I have this health problem and get in, but I really want to challenge it on its grounds because I think it's wrong.
Right.
Well, they challenged it all the way up. And then this Jacobson case, based on stare decisis, Jacobson versus Massachusetts, came right up and plunked them in the face because old Mr. Jacobson, who had ailments caused by vaccines prior, he said, hey, look, I'm not going to do it. He still had to pay the $5 fine.
So that's the precedent there, right?
That's the precedent. It's point blank in the discussion. Let's hear what Justice Harlan writes. It was a 7-2 majority opinion. There's still 9 members of the court then. And he held that in every well-ordered society charged with the duty of conserving the safety of its members and rights of the individual in respect of his liberty may at times, under the pressure of great dangers, be subjected to such restraint to be enforced by reasonable regulations as the safety of the general public demand, and that real liberty for all could not exist under the operation of a principle which recognizes the right of each individual person to his own liberty, whether in respect of his person or his property, regardless of the injury that may be done to others. So, for old Jacobson, they say, look, man, you're gonna have to take a knock. It's gonna be tough on you. You don't trust the smallpox vaccine, Edward. You don't trust a measles vaccine or a mumps vaccine or a rubella vaccine or a diphtheria vaccine or a tetanus shot or a pertussis vaccine or a meningitis vaccine. You don't trust all these things, but if you don't get them, you endanger others, is what they're saying. And that was the opinion of Justice Harlan for smallpox in 1905. And interestingly, here on Law Focus, that would have had to have been the opinion that Justice Amy Coney Barrett, read in rejecting Indiana University's students' desire to attend school without a vaccine. Vaccinations are not new. This vaccination we're coming into, they say, oh, it's the COVID-19 vaccine or it's the Delta variant vaccine, whatever. Vaccines have, if you go to a school, they require a tetanus shot or they require that you have been vaccinated for pertussis. Or measles or mumps. There are some, in a period of time, polio. There were some periods of time when vaccines were new, that the polio vaccine was new, or the measles or mumps vaccine was new, and there were some holdouts during that period of time. The smallpox vaccine was new. And Mr. Jacobson, he didn't, I don't know how he espoused his views, but Mr. Jacobson was a lot like the people out today that say, I'm not going to be vaccinated. And the Supreme Court has ruled, and because of stare decisis and because potentially of the views of Amy Coney, Justice Barrett, and the other justices, those kinds of rules are still going to be upheld. So it's important to think these things through. I'm glad we were able to go through a basic overview of what I know about the Delta variant and how the law is evolving or not evolving in this circumstance. In 1905, the Supreme Court said you can force it, vaccination can be forced. In 2021, Amy Coney Barrett said we can require vaccinations to attend a public university. It's pretty interesting to think that through. And understand that mandatory vaccinations for entry into certain places is not the same as a compelled vaccination, whereby I don't think anybody out there is claiming that the government is going to come and hold you down and shoot you up. They might be claiming it, but it seems very unlikely that that could happen. There's no Supreme Court precedent that would establish that. If you were in your own home, the government coming in and vaccinating you appears unlikely. Now, if you go out into society, like Justice Harlan said, and you endanger others, then that's where the laws can come and affect your bodily autonomy.
We'll be following it, and we'll have another update on one of the upcoming shows. And thank you for shedding some light there. Mr. Jacobson had to get the vaccine.
He had to get the vaccine. Or pay the fine.
Or pay the fine. Oh, really?
Right.
He could still refuse the vaccine. Or you have to get the vaccine and pay the fine.
Next week's law, folks. We're going to take a look.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank y'all. Goodbye.